Good morning, friends. It is 10 o'clock in the morning, Pacific Standard Time on the 2nd of April. And I am waiting for some of you all to join me here. I'm sure you will momentarily. You're probably all getting your coffee. Oh, Catherine, I just love you. I hope we meet sometime. Um, Catherine's always on time. Oh, look, and the bunch of you are too. That's wonderful news. Oh, bunches are joining us. Hello, hello, hello. Well, you may or may not be aware of this, but April 2nd, 2020 is International Children's Book Day. So, um, here's what I suggest. Here's how you can celebrate. If there is a child in your house, read them a children's book. Won't that be fun? I'm thinking I might see if I can do some FaceTiming with my grandkids today and read a children's book to them. I'm sure I've got something around here. And if you don't have, so if you don't have a child in the house, you can read them a book online or on the phone or whatever. I know they will love it, and their parents will love you too because, yeah, parents are looking for a distraction for kids right now. And so, because it is International Children's Book Day, I wanted to highlight a digital resource I have mentioned before, but I felt was worth repeating. Stories.audible.com. It's there in the show notes. And they right now are making hundreds of, maybe even thousands, I don't know, of books available to listen to, audiobooks for free. There are many classic books that are in the public domain for adults, but there are also lots and lots of children's books. So that would be a really good way, or just pull out a plain old book. Or another thing you could do, you could purchase a children's book for a child in your life, your child, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, the neighbor kid, whoever. Kids are reading a lot right now. I actually talked to my editor just the other day, and she said, times are rough, but children's book sales are up. I don't sell children's book, but that's all good. Joan Honerhoff has joined, and I wanted to say, Joan, I am drinking out of the owl mug that you and Lyndall sent me, and I love it. And I also wanted to say, Joan, thank you for the birthday card. That was very nice. I've been meaning to write to you, and I'm really busy. So, but I loved it, and it was so sweet of you, and thank you. All right, that was my little personal shout out. Do you want to read the book? Yes. And because you were so good yesterday, I'm going to read 3 chapters again today. And I'm sorry if I slurp my tea too loud. I'll try to be quiet, but it's kind of hot. We are on chapter 21, so let's get to it, shall we? Chapter 21, Evelyn Dixon. Finally, on that awful Saturday night, after being unable to reach Garrett and unable to talk frankly with Mary Dell, I dialed Dr. Finney. Though she'd urged me to call any time, I hated bothering her at home, but I simply had to talk to someone who understood what I was going through. We spent almost an hour talking through my fears, not just about the cancer, but about everything. The future of my business, of what would happen to me if the shop failed or the surgery failed, of how my body would look after the surgery, of chemotherapy, of how Garrett would react to the news, of living the rest of my life alone, of never being wanted again or having sex again, of everything, and especially the fear. No, make that the certainty that I was no longer in control of my own life. We talked and listened and cried together and laughed together, and it helped. It didn't change anything, but being able to talk made everything a little less overwhelming. She said one thing in particular that stuck with me, that while I might not be in control of the disease, I was in control of my reaction to it. I could be a victim or I could be a conqueror. It was up to me. One thing I know from experience, she said, it's always a lot easier to be a conqueror if you don't try to go it alone. You didn't see Napoleon riding off to battle with just himself and his trusty sword. He brought in some backup. Napoleon ended up defeated, imprisoned, and exiled to a tiny island in the Atlantic. She laughed. Okay, bad illustration, but you get the idea. Evelyn, you need to talk to your family and friends. I know you wanted to wait until after the holidays, but I think you should tell them now. It's your choice, of course, but think how you would feel if the tables were turned. What if someone you cared about had cancer and kept it a secret from you? I saw her point. Margot, Abigail, Liza, and Charlie, too. It wasn't fair to keep them in the dark any longer. I would tell them the truth, all at once, so I could get it over with, during our regular quilt circle meeting. I would invite Charlie to be an honorary member for the evening. Sitting at my desk, I wrote a list of every question I thought would come up during our discussion and thought carefully about my answers. I wanted to be prepared, to tell them on my own terms and in my own way, calmly, rationally, and with optimism regarding the outcome. It would be good practice for my conversation with Garrett. That would come next. I didn't want to give him the news over the telephone. I briefly considered flying out to Seattle to see him, but after a quick search on the internet, I realized there were no airline seats available this close to Christmas. Well, not at a price that I could afford. So I decided to call him as soon as I told the others that same night. Hopefully I'd catch him at home. I didn't want to tell him while there were other people around. But it didn't quite work out that way. On Christmas Eve, while I was baking a pan of cranberry cake and preparing a batch of hot spice cider to serve to my guests later that afternoon, the phone rang. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom, guess where I am? I just landed in the Hartford airport and I am renting a car. The company had handed out bonus checks at the Christmas party, and that's where I was when you called. After I heard your message, I decided to spend my bonus on an airline ticket. So you better send all your boyfriends home and make up the sofa. I'm coming home for Christmas. An hour later, he was in my arms and I was crying, so happy to see him. And all my careful planning went right out the window. I sat him down then and there before he'd had a chance to unpack his things. And I told him the truth about everything that had happened since I'd come to New Bern. I had to. The others were due in less than an hour, and I needed to talk to Garrett alone. Even without practicing on the quilt circle, I managed to get through my speech without crying. When I first said the word cancer, his eyes grew wide, but he regained his composure quickly and deliberately, asked good questions, and stayed calm. It was only when he learned about my first surgery that his emotional armor showed a crack. And you didn't tell me? He said, his voice rising in pitch and volume. You've been dealing with this since fall, and you never told me. Your business almost fails. You get breast cancer, have a surgery, find out you need another, and you tell a pile of strangers about this and let them have it. But I'm left in the dark? Your own son? I nodded, conceding his right to be angry. These questions and his probable reaction had also been on my list. I'd already thought through what I should say. I know, I should have told you. But I thought, Garrett, you have your new job, your new life. I didn't want to get in the way of that. If the first surgery had turned out the way I hoped, I'd planned to tell you after, so you didn't have to be worried about anything. I guess I was just trying to protect you. His lips pressed into a flat line of irritation. Mom, I am 24 years old. You don't have to protect me anymore. I can take care of myself. When the situation calls for it, I can even help take care of you. You're right. And I should have known better. I'm sorry. I apologized and meant it. It won't happen again, I promise. From here on out, you'll know everything I do. No more secrets. Ask me anything. All right, he said, and proceeded to ask the one question I hadn't anticipated. When were you planning on telling Dad? It was past 11 by the time everyone left, and almost midnight when Garrett and I finished washing up the dishes and making up the pull-out sofa in the living room. I tried to get him to take my room, but he wouldn't hear of it. I'll be fine here. Last week I put in 20 hours, passed out on the floor of my office for 2, and then got up and put in another 8. Trust me, I can sleep anywhere. I had my doubts, but recognized that stubborn look on my son's face. All right, if you're sure. Good night, sweetheart, I said, and gave him a squeeze. I'm so glad you're here. Me too, Mom. I went into my room, sat cross-legged in the middle of the bed, and picked up the phone. It was 11 in Texas. Normally, I'd never dream of calling anyone at that hour, but in all the years I'd been married to Rob, I'd never known him to shut out his lights before midnight. I went to the bed around 10 while I went to bed around 10 while he stayed up to write memos and answer emails he had gotten during the workday, then quietly slipped into bed sometime after 12, between 12 and 2 without ever waking me up. Gee, I thought to myself, think that might help explain why we're divorced? I started dialing but stopped before I got to the last number. I didn't want to call Rob. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. What was I going to say when he answered the phone? Even worse, what was I going to say if she answered the phone? I'd heard from Sharon, one of my old neighbors in Texas, that Tina had moved in with Rob about 10 seconds after our divorce was final. Sharon was a terrible gossip, the kind who liked to spread information via her church prayer chain. You know the kind I'm talking about. It was like in a neighborhood I was in a neighborhood Bible study with her for a while, and when it came time for us to voice our prayer requests, Sharon's always went something like, "Dear Lord, please help Francine Diamond, who lives next to the house with the pink brick on the corner of Lake Mead and Alamo Drive. Her husband David lost his job again for looking at pornography on the internet during office hours, and their daughter Denise has just checked into rehab for her bulimia problem. We just ask that you would help this family, Lord, and encourage poor Francine. Help her lean on your strength so she may be a better wife and mother and understand why her family is in a shambles. Amen." Suffice it to say that when Sharon called to tell me that Tina had moved into Rob's condo and asked how she might pray for me in my hour of need, I declined the offer. Sharon was terribly disappointed by my reaction. "Well, if you change your mind and you want me to pray for you, don't you hesitate to call." "I know she must be suffering," she sighed sympathetically. "Actually, Sharon, I'm not suffering at all. I'm happy in my new life and so busy with my business that I rarely have time to think about Rob," I said, and it was the truth. Then I said, "But I appreciate your concern," which was a lie. Until now, I hadn't thought much about Tina, except to wonder how she'd lasted as long as she did. I'd seen her only once, about 28, skinny, big eyes, big blonde hair, well, you get the idea. She worked as a receptionist at the gym. If you'd called Central Casting to find someone to play the other woman opposite a mid-level manager in a midlife crisis, the talent agency would have sent Tina. That was part of what made our divorce so awful. I mean, not that I'd have been any happier if my husband had left me for a rocket science or a Pulitzer Prize winner, but at least it might have made some kind of sense. At first, I'd really believed Rob would wake up and realize he'd sacrificed his home, his family, in fact, everything that mattered, just so he could move into Barbie's dream home, but he never did. It was sad and still a little hard to believe. I'd always credited him with more sense. An irritating recorded message was telling me over and over again to please hang up and dial again. I pushed my finger against the receiver, closed my eyes, and groaned. I did not want to call Rob. If Garrett hadn't insisted, if he hadn't played on the guilt I felt over not telling him and made me promise. But I had promised. There was no getting around it. The phone rang several times before Rob, not Tina, answered. "Hello? Hi, it's me." There was a brief pause. For a moment I wondered if he'd forgotten my name, and I was about to remind him, but he broke in. His voice was worried. "Evelyn, what's wrong? Has something happened to Garrett?" No, nothing like that. Everything's fine. Garrett is fine. In fact, he's here. He flew in to spend Christmas with me." "Oh, that's nice," he said, and I imagined I heard a touch of wistfulness in his voice, remembering what Christmas was like when we were all together. But if he was thinking about those happy times, he didn't say anything. He just waited for me to speak. Taking a quick breath, I jumped in, trying to keep everything as matter-of-fact and to the point as possible. "Listen, Rob, I said everything's fine, but that isn't quite right. I have breast cancer." "Oh my God," he gasped. "Evelyn, I first found out a few months ago and had an operation," I interrupted, plowing on. The last thing I wanted from him right now was to start voicing some guilt-ridden apology or insincere expressions of concern. "They weren't able to get everything on the first go-round. I'll be going in for a double mastectomy at the end of January." "A double? Oh my God," he repeated. "Evie, I can't believe it. Is there anything I can do?" His use of one of my old nicknames annoyed me. I wouldn't have bothered you about it, but Garrett wanted me to. Well, I'm glad he did. Yeah, I'm just in shock, I guess. Can I help you with anything? Do you have good insurance? Do you need money? I shook my head. Typical, I thought. Rob was always a quick draw with his wallet. So much easier than actually doing anything that might encroach on his work schedule or, heaven forbid, his emotions. No, I snapped. I didn't call to beg you for money. At the moment, that is the least of my worries. Hey, Evie, that's not fair. Don't be like that. I know you must be upset and worried, and I was just trying to... You know, Rob, I don't really care what you were trying to do. Seems like half the conversations in our marriage were you trying to explain your way out of something. I don't want to hear it anymore. Since we're not married anymore, I don't have to. And don't call me Evie. I didn't call to ask for your help or your money or your sympathy. I did it for Garrett. Our son made me promise to call and tell you that I have cancer. And now I have. There. I banged the receiver down without saying goodnight, telling myself it felt good to be able to slam the door in his face for once, and wondering if the satisfaction of revenge was supposed to make people cry. That was chapter 21. Almug. Chapter 22. Evelyn Burgess Wynne. We bid Evelyn and her son Garrett good night and walked out into the darkened courtyard. A gentle fall of snow floated down from the sky at a leisurely pace, like that soapflake snow they used to make holiday television specials. Everyone was quiet. I think they were all still in shock. Charlie was the first to speak, and he was angry. How could she have waited so long to say anything? I know I'm not family, but surely after all these months, she has a clue about how I... His voice trailed off, and he left the rest of the sentence unspoken, but it didn't take any special insight to know what he'd intended to say. For some time, I'd suspected that Charlie's feelings for Evelyn went beyond friendship. The signs were all there, the lilt in his step as he whistled his way down the street, the special meals he made during her recovery, their morning meetings at the coffee shop. He was happier than I'd ever seen him. He'd even taken to complimenting his waiters, a heretofore unheard-of development. Charlie wasn't the kind of person who made new friends easily. The life of a restaurateur was much too busy to allow for relationships with people who weren't also in the business. But somehow or other, he found time for Evelyn. It was obvious that he cared about her deeply. In my mind, I finished the question for him. After all these months, how could Evelyn have failed to notice that Charlie was in love with her? I waited for something, thinking that Margot would jump in and say... I waited for a moment, thinking that Margot would jump in and say something to comfort poor Charlie. She was good at that sort of thing. But she seemed to be lost in her own thoughts. Awkwardly, I reached over and patted Charlie on the arm. She has so many worries right now, Charlie. I don't think she was trying to exclude you from her life. You heard what she said. She didn't want to worry any of us, especially with the holidays coming. Well, what difference does that make? His voice was raised, and I shushed him, concerned that Evelyn might hear him through the windows of her apartment. She was only one floor up from the courtyard. What difference does that make? He repeated, whispering but still angry. I am worried. The number of the day on the calendar doesn't make me less so. Margot, as always the soul of sensitivity, spoke. It doesn't make much sense to me either, but I've never had to face what Evelyn is facing right now. None of us has. Who knows how we would react in a similar situation? Maybe she really was trying to be protective of us, or maybe she was just trying to avoid dealing with the reality. Who knows? Well, I can understand her reluctance, I said. It's her private business. Why should she have to share every detail of her personal life with us? After all, it's not like we're family. Without saying anything, Liza turned to face me. I heard the heel of her boot crunch down in the snow. In the dim half-light cast by the bulb of a single spotlight in the far corner of the courtyard, I could just make out the expression on her face, a look of intense disgust, bordering on hatred, a look she hadn't cast in my direction with quite as much vehemence since her early weeks in New Bern. What in the world had I done wrong now? No, Margot continued, but she needs us as if she were. I'm glad her son is here now. He seems like a nice man. But Evelyn said he'll have to go back to Seattle on Monday. Even if he could stay, she'd still need our support. This is going to be much tougher than the last operation. It is, I concurred. I've known several people who've gone through a mastectomy. It won't be like before when she was out of commission for just a few days. We'll all have to pitch in and help run the shop while she's recovering. I don't know much about retail, but if I can help. Next to me, Liza coughed a few times, interrupting my train of thought. Margot looked at her. Are you all right? Fine, she answered hoarsely, getting a cold. Well, Charlie growled and pulled his coat collar up. Evelyn can count on me. She always could. She only had to ask. That's all I'm saying. It wasn't fair to leave us in the dark for this long. Margot nodded. I know, but she wasn't trying to be hurtful or uncaring. If anything, it was the opposite, I interjected. She didn't say anything until now because she does care. That's right, Margot beamed, happy to have my support in her effort to restore Charlie's spirits. And after all, she did apologize. That's why she decided to tell us tonight, because she realized her mistake. I suppose. Charlie twisted his lips thoughtfully. We're supposed to spend Christmas Day together, Evelyn and I. Do you suppose she'll still want me to come? I mean, what with Garrett here and all? I was going to make my duck confit, but maybe she'd rather have dinner just the two of them. I'm sure she'd have said something if her plans had changed, I said, and Margot nodded agreement. In that case, Charlie said, puffing out a big white cloud of breath that seemed to dissipate the last vapors of his anger, I'd better get back to the restaurant and see to my duck and my customers. You'd think that people would want to be around hearth and home on Christmas Eve, but the Dillards have decided to throw a party for their friends in my restaurant. Aren't you one of the guests, Abigail? We'd better get over there. Karen Dillard hates it when people show up late. I'd almost forgotten about the party. Thank you for the reminder, Charlie. I'll be over directly. All right, I'll see you soon. Good night, ladies. Merry Christmas. He waved over his shoulder as he walked down the alley and disappeared around the corner. Margot and I responded to his farewell, but Liza said nothing. I could still feel her eyes on me. Her gaze was making me feel very uncomfortable, which was exactly her intention. But I didn't look at her. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I guess I should be going too, Margot said. I have to get up early tomorrow. Are you still going to go to your sister's in Buffalo for Christmas? Maybe you should cancel and have dinner with us, I said hopefully. At the moment, the prospect of spending Christmas alone with Liza was far from appealing. She was obviously in one of her moods. Thank heaven I already had plans for the evening, but tomorrow would be just the two of us. Margot would be the perfect buffer. I had hoped Franklin might join us, but he was going into Manhattan to spend Christmas with his daughters. I hate to think of you driving all that way in this terrible weather. Margot laughed her musical giggle, looked up at the lazily drifting snowflakes, and held her arms out wide. You mean this little flurry? Abigail, I thought you were a native New Englander. You can't think a little snow is going to keep me from getting where I need to go. No, I fumbled. I suppose not, but you never can tell. They get terrible, these storms around Buffalo this time of year. Believe me, I know all about it. I grew up there, she said. I'll be fine, but you're so sweet to worry about me. I'd love an excuse to spend the holidays with you and Liza, but if I don't show up, I'll never hear the end of it. It'd be one more thing for my sister to resent about me. She sighed. You don't get along with your sister? Liza asked, clearly surprised. Margot shook her head. Why not? I can't imagine anyone not liking you. Margot smiled. Well, that's sweet of you to say, Liza, but nobody gets along with everyone. And it isn't really that we don't get along. It's just that, well, I don't know what it is, really. It just seems like my sister has never approved of anything about me. Not since we were kids. Still, she's my sister, and I love her. Margot shrugged. I might not always like her, but I love her. That's just the way it works in families. Liza paused for a moment before responding. So I've heard, she said flatly, but I really wouldn't know. Not from personal experience. She shot me a final cold stare before turning on her heel and walking away. Her shoulders were hunched as she tramped angrily down the alley. She was trying to make a dramatic exit, but the snow muffled the intended intensity of her stomped footsteps, turning what should have been a drumbeat departure into a soft flump, flump of waffled rubber treading on snowflakes. Still, the message came through, loud and clear. The sound of her steps grew fainter as she moved farther off. They were an accusation just the same. Reluctantly, I said goodnight to Margot, wished her a Merry Christmas, and followed Liza. At the end of the alley, Liza crossed the street in the direction of the house without speaking to me, still stomping her disapproval. When I exited the alley, I paused on the sidewalk for a moment, considering my options. Perhaps I should go after her, follow her to the house, and try to get her to tell me what was bothering her so we could clear the air and still enjoy a nice Christmas together. It had been years since I'd spent Christmas with family, not since Wooly died. Of course, I always had my pick of invitations to Christmas dinner. Sometimes I accepted, but more often than not, I just stayed home. It was always such a bother, having to buy gifts for a crowd of people you really didn't know and fussing over what to wear. It always felt so much more like putting on a costume to perform your part in a play about Christmas than partaking of the actual celebration. Christmas should be about walking into church in the snow, attending midnight services with the sanctuary bathed in candlelight, waking up early the next morning and going downstairs in your robe to open gifts from and to people you care about, wandering in and out of the kitchen trying to steal a bite of whatever it was that smelled so delicious, then playing board games in front of the fire or singing round the piano or doing whatever you wanted to do until dinner was ready and everyone sat down to bless the food, talking and laughing and eating too much, tucked up warm and safe together while the snow drifted past the window and the shadows of evening began to fall. That's what Christmas should be about, I thought bitterly, but somehow it never has been. Not even when Wooly was alive. Not since I was a girl, spending Christmas with Mother and Father and Susan. A sudden gust of wind blew down the street, whipping the snow into a furious cloud that stung my face and made me close my eyes against the pane. Liza marched across the green toward the house. I shivered, looked at my watch, then took a left turn and hurried down the street into the direction of the restaurant. Catherine Dillard hated for her guests to arrive late. Chapter 23. Evelyn Dixon. Though Garrett's arrival was a surprise, I managed to pull together some semblance of a family Christmas. Of course, it helped that I owned a quilt shop. Downstairs, I found 2 samples from the crazy quilted Christmas stocking class to hang on our hearth. We took turns playing Santa and filled them with gifts. Our offerings were improvised but very creative. The next morning, we laughed as we sat down on the floor next to the tree and emptied our stockings. I'd scoured the apartment for gifts and found an orange, a pack of chewing gum, a box of matches from the grill, some soap and a plastic-wrapped toothbrush they'd given me at the hospital, and a mostly unused book of crossword puzzles that Margot had given me during my recovery. The rest of the presents came from the shop. After I added a spool of thread, a package of needles, another of safety pins, an official cobbled court quilt's pink tape measurer, a pair of embroidery scissors, the stocking fairly bulged with bounty. "Mom," Garrett grinned as he held up the measuring tape by one end, letting it dangle from his fingers like some sort of pink and black striped snake. "I know you've always hoped I'd be a girl, but get over it already, will you? I am never going to take up quilting." "Very funny. I just thought it would be nice for you to have some kind of sewing kit. You probably have a closet full of shirts with loose buttons that need repairing." Garrett nodded. "Actually, I do. I brought them all with me in my suitcase, along with my dirty laundry. Thought you wouldn't mind taking care of that for me." "Not a chance, darling, but I'll be more than happy to teach you how to thread a needle." Somehow I thought you'd say that. Well, it was worth a try." He leaned over and gave me a hug. "Thank you for the presents, Mom. They were just what I needed. Now, go on, open yours." Garrett seemed to have done his shopping at the Seattle airport and en route to Hartford. In addition to a pound of coffee beans and a mug, a Seattle Mariners baseball cap, a tiny Seattle Ferry tree ornament, I received a package of pretzels, a pair of plastic headphones, an eye mask, and a thin blue blanket still sealed with a plastic bag, all from the same airline. By the time I finished going through the stocking, I was laughing so hard there were tears in my eyes. What did you do? Make friends with the flight attendants, or just wait until their backs were turned and steal all this stuff? Oh, very nice, Garrett said with mock indignation. Here I go to all the trouble of getting you some presents, and you accuse me of theft. Listen, this took some doing. This isn't the cheap junk they give to me and the other poor saps riding back in steerage. This Christmas stocking is first class. Of course I made friends with the flight attendants. I had to. Back where I was riding, they don't even give you pretzels. Getting all this took a lot of sweet talking on my part. He stretched out his arms wide as though yawning and then flexed them into a bodybuilder pose. Of course, he said in his best surfer dude impression, the one he'd perfected in high school, I've always been lucky with the ladies. Look at these guns. They were putty in my hands. That right? Last I heard, you were still dateless in Seattle. Were you trying to tell me something? I asked hopefully. It worried me that Garrett never seemed to have any dates, let alone a steady girlfriend. He was a good-looking young man and so much fun to be with. In college, he'd gone out with a number of very nice girls. Nope, sorry, Mom. No news to report on the girlfriend front. I don't have time to look for one. I'm working 70-plus hours a week. By the time the weekend comes, and by weekend I mean Saturday after dark, I'm just too exhausted to go out. I just want to go home and sleep till it's time to go to work on Monday. Well, what about at work? There must be some girls at the office. He shook his head. There's not a woman in my entire department. The only female I see during the day is Antoinette, our 56-year-old married cleaning woman with varicose veins and a bad attitude. I got to tell you, she's starting to look pretty good to me. He laughed and I joined in, but not wholeheartedly. In typical Garrett fashion, always trying to put the best face on things, he was making light of his troubles, but I knew he must be lonely. But what about you? He said, changing the subject. Are you seeing anyone? Looks to me like that Charlie fellow has a thing for you. I got up from the floor and went into the kitchen to start making breakfast. Charlie? We're just friends. Garrett followed me, opened the silverware drawer, and started setting the table. That had always been his job when he was growing up. We had so many good conversations, me fixing dinner while he put out the cutlery. I smiled to myself, thinking how wonderful it was to have him here, and how easily we'd settled back into our old routines. I was glad he'd come. Didn't look like that to me, he said. Have you noticed how he looks at you? Even when he's talking to somebody else, he's got one eye on you. The man is completely gone on you. I felt myself blushing as I cracked eggs into a mixing bowl. Don't be silly, I told you. We're friends. We have a lot in common. Since we both own our own business, that's all. Charlie had been kind to me, a wonderful friend in every way, but I couldn't imagine that he wanted to be more than that. Tell the truth, I couldn't imagine anyone feeling that way about me, especially not now. Really, Garrett, it's just a friendship. Garrett shrugged. Have it your way. He put down 2 knives and set spoons next to them. But I don't know why you're so surprised. You're beautiful, Mom. He grinned. I mean, for a woman your age and all. Oh, thanks very much. I tossed a red Christmas napkin across the kitchen island, hoping to hit him playfully in the face, but it landed on the table instead. You're not so bad yourself for a computer nerd and all. Garrett finished setting the table, and I brought the dishes over. It wasn't a fancy meal, just scrambled eggs, grapefruit sections, and red grapes garnished with mint, plus orange juice, coffee, and some banana nut muffins, not nearly as splendid as the Christmas breakfasts I had prepared when Garrett was little. But I knew Charlie was bringing his fabulous duck confit for dinner, and I was providing the side dishes, as well as 2 desserts, my chocolate peppermint layer cake and a pecan pie, so I wanted to make sure we had plenty of room for later. Still, with an evergreen and holly centerpiece and my best dishes and cloth napkins, the table looked very pretty. Mom, this looks great, Garrett exclaimed as I put down a platter of eggs. Oh, wait a minute, I almost forgot. He ran back into my bedroom, where he'd stowed his bags, and emerged with a half bottle of champagne. Here we go. He unpeeled the foil wrapper off the neck of the bottle and started trying to uncork it. It's warm, but we can mix it with the cold orange juice for mimosas. I laughed. Well, this is a surprise. When did you have time to buy champagne? I told you, Mom, the ladies love me. Catherine, the head flight attendant, slipped this into my briefcase. She did? Wow. Was she cute? Did you get her phone number? I'd rather Garrett had found a girlfriend who didn't travel all the time, but the way things were going, I was willing to compromise. Besides, she must be a smart, ambitious woman to have been made head flight attendant. Cute? Definitely. Gray hair swept up into a bun, swell reading glasses. He let out a wolf whistle and then laughed. Mom, she was about 60, and she had a son older than me. I was hanging out in the galley to stretch my legs. When she heard I was flying home to surprise my mother for Christmas, she gave me this. Oh, I said, a little disappointed. Well, that was sweet of her. After some struggle and a flurry of excitement when the bubbles foamed up and spilled from the bottle, Garrett poured a little of the champagne into each of our orange juice glasses, and we sat down to eat. This looks like a pretty skimpy breakfast compared to the old days, but I didn't want to fill you up too much before dinner. Charlie's duck is out of this world, I said, and put a scoop of eggs onto Garrett's plate. I hope you don't mind that Charlie's joining us for dinner. I'd already invited him before I knew you were coming. Garrett shook his head and picked up his fork. No, he seems like a great guy. You've got to respect a guy who knows how to cook a duck. My cooking skills haven't progressed much beyond ramen noodles and toaster strudel. Looking at you, I can believe it. You're too thin, I scolded, watching him devouring his breakfast and wondering if I should have scrambled more eggs. I'm worried about you. You work 12 and 14-hour days, you're too tired even to take a girl on a date, and you don't eat. I know you're making good money at your job, but I wonder if you're at the right company. Life is short, honey, too short to spend it on working for nothing more than a paycheck. I know you like your job, but... Actually, he said through a mouthful of scrambled eggs, I hate my job. Don't get me wrong, I love working with computers, but I trained to be a designer. My dream was to work with clients to create new sites, new programs, and solve problems. Instead, I sit in front of a screen all day long and stare at long rows of code. I can go days without talking to another human being in person. He put down his fork and took a deep breath. That's why I quit. You did? When did you decide to do that? Last night, actually. So I guess you could say I'm going to quit. First thing Monday morning, I'm going to fly back to Seattle, give my 2 weeks notice, and then fly back here for a while to figure out what my next move is. That sleeper sofa of yours is more comfortable than it looks. He grinned and bit into a muffin. Garrett, you decided this just last night? I was worried about the hours he was keeping, but this seemed like an awfully rash and suspicious decision. This wouldn't have anything to do with finding out that I had cancer, would it? Because I told you, Garrett, I'm going to be fine. I can handle this. I won't have you jeopardizing your future just because of me. His mouth was still full of muffins, so he held up both hands, cutting off my protests until he could speak. When he did, the light-hearted tone was gone. He was dead serious, calm, and undeterred. For the first time, I saw not my son, full of boyish charm and mischief, but a competent and determined young man. No wonder so many company recruiters had courted him when he graduated from college. Okay, he said, swallowing the last of the muffin. First of all, I am not jeopardizing my future. Not even close. If I want another corporate job, I can have one tomorrow. But I don't want another corporate job. I want to do what I was trained to do, design. The only way to do that is to go out on my own. I tried to jump in, but he cut me off. And before you even go bringing it up, I can completely afford this. The upside of working for Claremont Solutions is the money. They give you lots of it and keep you so busy that you don't actually have time to spend any of it. It's all sitting there in my bank account. And yes, even though you say you don't need my help, I want to hang around until you're back to your old self, he said. He said the next part so firmly that I wondered if he was as confident about my recovery as he sounded. You're going to get well, and I want to be there to help you do it. Is that such a terrible thing for a son to want to do? Help his mother, who spent her whole life helping him? No, I said quietly. Of course not. But I don't want you to sacrificing your future just because of me. You've got your whole life in front of you. He nodded in agreement. Yes, but as you said, life is short. Too short to spend another 10 years or 5 doing a job I hate. I'd have figured it out myself before too long, but talking to you last night and seeing how happy you are here, he tilted his head toward the door that led downstairs to the shop. What great friends you have, and how you're finally getting to do what you always wanted. It's just helped clarify some thoughts that have been floating around in my brain for months. He smiled, reached across the table, and grabbed my hand. Mom, I want to do this. It's the right decision at the right time in my life. And if it helps you too, that's even better. Trust me, I'm a grown man. I know what I'm doing. I was quiet for a moment. Garrett's eyes searched my face, waiting for me to speak. All right, I nodded slowly. Good. It'll be good to have you around for a while. But Garrett, if you change your mind or if you get an offer for a job you think you'd like, don't feel like you have to come back here to New Bern. Don't worry about me. I know, you can take care of yourself. Tell me about it. He reached for the champagne bottle, topped off our mimosas, and raised his glass in a toast. To living our dreams. To living our dreams, I echoed, and lifted my glass and touched the rim against his. That is the end of chapter 23, my dear friends. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it to you. It's so nice you guys have gotten so many good thoughts for you, and I'm just glad you're all enjoying this time, and I look forward to these times together. As is my habit, I like to share a Bible verse that I've been reading at the end of our days. This is the one that came from me because, you know what, I know not everybody can get outside right now, but if you can, especially at night, do. Or during the day, whenever is the most beautiful time of day where you are. Either look out the window or go for a little walk, because it will remind you that though things so often seem like totally out of control and nothing is constant, some things are. Nature is. And it reminds us, the beauty of nature I find very comforting. So here's my verse today. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Something good to remember today. Have a terrific Thursday. I hope to see you all here again tomorrow. Thanks, my friends.